What's going on, everyone? It's Rick Barrett back here with the Barrett Breakdown, the show where we cut through the noise, we drop the talking points, we have real conversations that actually matter. Now, you know me, or if this is your first time watching one of my interviews, I don't like to play it safe, especially nowadays. Too many people do. I'm here to ask questions that most people avoid, and I want to give my guests, more importantly, the space to answer these questions and speak the truth about that matter. Whether it's politics, culture, faith, freedom, this show is about honest talk from people who aren't afraid to challenge that narrative. Now, today's guest is somebody who you're definitely going to want to hear from. His name is John Slaughter. We're going to talk about his military service, his faith, what led him to write his book, The Crimson Veil. I really want to get into that, and how people with conservative leanings need to get in the fight culturally, among other things. And by the end of this conversation, you're going to be thinking about these topics a whole lot differently. So sit back, grab a smoke, grab a drink, maybe some snacks, and get comfortable because the Barrett Breakdown is here and we're just getting started. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the Barrett Breakdown is beginning, and I want to bring on my guest. Without further ado, Mr. John Slaughter. Welcome to the Barrett Breakdown, sir. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
Awesome, man. No, I'm glad to be here. We've been mutuals a while, so I'm glad you finally reached out. So this should be
Yeah,
fun.
it is interesting when you actually reach out to mutuals on the X platform instead of just kind of reposting their stuff every day and see if they're not a bot from India or whatever the case may be. So it's good to finally talk, especially with somebody who I've been very interested and following what you've been doing, especially with your book and just your takes that are really good. And so without let me stop talking here for a moment and give you a chance to introduce yourself, maybe give yourself a little bit of background.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm a jack of. I always tell people I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I'm a writer. I won't divulge my full professional career, but I'm a father, a husband. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years. Um, and I've always been an extremely political person. As much as I've tried to avoid that, I think a lot of people do. I would always try to step away from it, but it always drew me back in. And then, having kids obviously made that even more important. And so I finally got a bunch of encouragement from other people and finally started writing down my thoughts and putting them out online and trying to sort of do my best to kind of guide the younger generation as I see it. And that's sort of my goal.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting because we're seeing the younger generation desperate for leadership, desperate for acknowledgement, even instead of just being worker bees to shut up and go you do some customer service job or some entry level job or whatever. They actually are looking for the same kind of guidance that we're given to people like you and I. And it's good that men like yourself are doing such a thing. Now, let me just ask you that real quick. Your thoughts on the current divide, especially on the conservative side. We're seeing a lot of implosions happening to the supposed MAGA movement, the coalition, the Maha MAGA, all these other kinds of things. And one of these tension points that we're seeing is Gen Z, younger generations, and your quote unquote boomers, who, boomers kind of want things to be the way they've always been. And Gen Z is saying things can never be the way they were. What are your thoughts just observing that, especially since you have children of your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big issues that comes up, and I talk to a lot of boomers, is they're still under the delusion that, and you see this with Trump a lot, that if you can somehow fix the economic situation, it'll automatically reset things back to like 1950, right? that if you can onshore jobs, which is great, and I'm all for that, but doing that alone or raising the GDP or trying to go back to what they believe was let's say a colorblind meritocracy, if they can do those things, you're going to fix the country. And the younger generation who is more boots on the ground, they're seeing the consequences of all of the policies and everything that has been implemented. And it's not all the boomers' fault. The boomers did inherit some of this, their parents' generation, they're the ones responsible. One of the biggest issues we see now is, can we take down the Civil Rights Act, right? Because that entire apparatus has been weaponized and used to, structurally change the United States in ways that, not necessarily are for the best. But that wasn't something the boomers did. Now, they may have helped push it on, right? But that was not necessarily a child of their doing. So I think the big issue is that the older generation, one, is financially sort of dependent on things going smoothly for the next, let's say, what is it, 10 years, and they'll hit 50% mortality, I believe.
Yeah.
And so they're married to that idea, and they're also under this delusion that you can go backwards. Whereas the younger generation is looking at it and they're seeing, they're seeing the realities of what AI is going to bring, right? Whether that reaches the point of something that Elon Musk thinks or not, it's going to disrupt the job market. They're seeing the fact that, okay, well, even if they do get into college, they're having to compete with a constant stream of people from China and India. And when you talk to them in colleges, they're also dealing with, they get into the colleges, okay, I got into college. There's massive cheating rings that occur within those two communities specifically. So they're at a disadvantage there. Then they graduate, they get into the job market, and there's all these, affirmative action racial quotas. Even if they've been, taken off the books, they're still implemented, in a non-structured way, we'll say. And so they're seeing
a soft enforcement of it.
Yeah. I mean, so we had a university recently, and I don't remember which one it was. It was a smaller university in North Alabama, and they caught, I think it was like the dean of admissions or whatever, talking on camera about how they were still going to implement these racial quotas regardless. Like they were just going to find another way to do it. And so the kids are having to deal with the younger generation is dealing with all these problems. And what they see is that the conservatives specifically are focused on the Israel lobby, right? And whether or not, you feel that's good or bad, you have to, there has to be an understanding that when these kids are seeing all these domestic issues, but your entire platform, or at least a good percentage of it, is focused on a foreign country, that's going to cause issues. And so I think it's honestly, the conservative movement post World War II is kind of on its deathbed. It just doesn't work in the nation as it is now. And you're seeing the older generation kind of lash out and try to hold on to that. And they view the younger generation as trying to tear things down. And I don't believe they want to tear things down. I think they're just looking for some solid platform to start building from.
It's interesting. I made this point with another person. The baby boomers are one of their big things was the peace, love, and the breaking down and the free love movement and the rebellion against authority, right? Fight the man, victory, all this kind of stuff. And now they're in the exact same position of the people they were lashing out against, and they're having the exact same response, which is just sweet irony in my just the way I look at it as a historian, a guy who likes to look at history. I kind of laugh and go, oh yeah, there you go. It's the exact same thing you guys are doing. But this idea that just don't listen to Gen Z and just, you guys be quiet. You guys don't know what you're talking about. You guys are a bunch of incels and all the things that are thrown their way. And I'm just sitting here and I'm looking at people going, these people, regardless or not, are going to be running things within the next 15 years. And if you don't placate or at least acknowledge their struggles now, they're going to find a way. They're going to implement them later. And I don't think you're going to like that. And the best example is somebody like Nick Fuentes. You think Nick Fuentes is bad if you don't at least acknowledge Gen Z's dilemmas and try to help them, they're going to find somebody worse because they will look for a solution to their problem. Especially as you said, conservatism offers them nothing. It offers them no reprieve. It offers them no future. And so when you look at people like Trump, and you said it, we have one here in the state of Texas. You know, Ted Cruz is the greatest senator for Israel, his own words. And when you hear a man say that, who is a member of the U.S. Senate, you go, "What are we doing? Like, what are you doing here, Teddy?" And so it's very interesting to see how the older generations, not just boomers, but even Gen Xers and some, they feel like if we just ignore the problem, it, as you said, will kind of just write itself out if we can make the graph go back up.
Well, yeah, and I think to your point, like with Ted Cruz, they're constantly going on about this, and any pushback they receive, obviously they automatically just label it as anti-Semitism, regardless of whether it is or not. And Nick is almost like a stopgap measure to an extent, or I won't say stopgap. Nick is moderate compared to what they will create if they continue to do that. And I've tried to have this conversation with older people. Like, look, you can either, when that subject comes up, you could have acknowledged that yes, there is this relationship, and maybe we need to talk about it and be honest, or you can keep calling people names and attacking them when they bring it up, and you're just going to get something worse, right? And this is there are off ramps to this, to it getting worse, but they're so married to this, whether it's financially or ideologically, right? I mean, I grew up Southern Baptist, so I've seen sort of some of the dispensationalist insanity from very good people, and talked with them, and they've said the most unhinged things you could imagine in relation to that. And so with that subject, it's a good example of there are ways to address these issues before they get bad. And I always try to point people towards Otto von Bismarck, right? Because one of the things that Bismarck does when he comes to power is you have these socialist revolutions erupting all over Europe. He sees this, and what does Bismarck do? Is he realizes that, look, most of these people aren't like dyed-in-the-wool communists, right? What they're dealing with is the ramifications of the Industrial Revolution that uproots them from their normal way of life, the way they lived for thousands of years, relatively, right? They could live off the land, they could have a trade. All of a sudden, they can't do this. They're packed into cities, they're working in factories, and because of this, their social safety nets are gone and stuff like that. So they start demanding, social reforms, and the Socialist Party at the time is the only one offering that. And Bismarck cuts their legs out from under them by taking the core issues that they had, which was like old age pensions and like injury, basically injury insurance, right? So if you get injured on the job, things like that. And he brings those in, and it immediately sucks the winds out of the sails of the socialist movement in Germany at the time, right? And that delays anything till post World War I. But he's a great example of the fact that all it takes is somebody to be willing to listen to the younger generation, not dismiss their concerns, and actually hear, like, at the core, okay, well, what are their problems? What are they dealing with? They can't find jobs. They can't find wives, whatever it is. You might want to address that, because the last thing you want is a bunch of, unmarried young men that are angry at the system.
That, and we're slowly starting to see more and more of that. Now, you mentioned the left. The left has already got their solutions. We just don't want to acknowledge it. You have Mondani in New York, and then there's another mayor on the West Coast. I think it's either Portland or Seattle that was just elected as a straight socialist. So the left has already achieved their end goal in this regard. They've moved to socialism. And I don't know how far the right is going to get just screaming socialist, because the left doesn't care. And a lot of young people are seeing that because, when you listen to somebody like Mondani say, I'm going to make the buses go faster, and I'm going to give you this free stuff, and I'm going to give you that free stuff, you and I can laugh because we go, that doesn't make sense. But when you're a person with nothing, you're going to go, take from those people and give it to me, because I don't have anything. And I would like something to help me in this life, whether it's, the free childcare so I can maybe have a family, or whatever the case may be. So my scenario for you, John, is you get called into the White House. You're sitting in front of Trump. You get, 15 minutes to, John, my buddy, I need you to tell me 3 things that'll help the youth. What can you tell me, John? What is it?
I would say the first thing you're going to have to do is you are going to have to you have to you have to kill the H-1B program and the legal immigration immediately, and you have to shift all of that focus towards job training, towards young men and young women as well, but young Americans. All that energy, all that money you're putting into that program needs to pivot towards creating, educating young people to take those jobs that you're bringing those people in to do. That's the first thing you're going to need, because if they don't have jobs and they don't have a future, because one of the big things I would say would be, people get the boomer thing wrong all the time. They're like, oh, boomers didn't work hard. No, boomers worked hard, but their ROI was like, the return on investment for their work was there. They knew that if they worked hard, they could get something out of it. These young people don't see that. To my point earlier, the college thing, right? You go to college, then you can't get a job if you can even get into college. So what's the point, right? So it's not that they're lazy. It's just that, well, what's the motivation? So that has to be fixed. The second thing, from an economic standpoint, is we're going to have to deal with the fact that it's probably time to reevaluate how we view the free market, because part of our problem is that free capital is going to seek the highest profit margin possible. Yeah. And that means it's going to bring in foreigners. That means it's going to offshore jobs. You're going to have to become okay with the government being more involved to an extent with private companies. And you're going to have to look at economic models that, Japan post World War II, right? Why does Mitsubishi, why do these companies explode? There was a sort of a marriage between the Japanese government and these companies that was designed to foster competition and then elevate the best of those companies and then help push them. And it worked. Korea copied their model. China copied their model. A lot of people will point out that China economically is more fascist than it is communist at this point. And that is because they copied the Japanese, and the Japanese had you could call it third position, whatever. Labels don't really matter. I think we're in a post-ideological age anyways. What works? That would be the second thing. And I think the third thing would be, you're going to have to address the Israel issue, right? As a foreign power, and the lobbying issues and the wars, that all of that stems from that. If you address those three issues, you're giving people jobs. The economy can be oriented towards the benefit of the American people, we'll say, as opposed to the benefit of profits purely. And you can cut out the legs of the socialist sort of drive that you see with a lot of people, right? I think all those things, those would be the first three things that come to my mind. And then the Israel thing, just because it is such a hot topic that the conservative movement's willing to die on that hill, and it's not going to end well if they choose to do that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are sick in the influencer space of having to deal with that question, because as you've seen on many social media platforms, if anybody comes out in support with it, they'll just get spammed with, oh, $7,000 for you, 7,000 posts and things like that. It's just, they have to address the fact that people are kind of tired of somebody else being put in a priority position. And it's interesting. Every person I interview, at one point or another, we don't mean to do it, but the Israel issue comes up. That's how ingrained it is right now into the zeitgeist, if you will, at least on the conservative side, because it's an issue that the people in power, the people in that position, don't want to let go of, and so they constantly make the worst mistakes as far as trying to advertise it. And I don't want to stick on this issue for a long time, but just earlier in the year, where there was the example of a girl in the South, I think it was in Florida, where she grabbed at a guy who was wearing an Israeli shirt, and Pam Bondi put the entire force of the DOJ on her, and people are going, really, we're doing that now, Pam? That's what we're wasting our time on? And anti-Semitic laws and things like that. And it's becoming very clear to the younger generations that they are second priority in their own country. And that resentment really does kind of foment. So you have a couple different things here, John. You have the internal division happening on the conservative movement, and you also have the left, whatever you want to call them, fascist, socialist, gay, race, communist, whatever. There's many labels you can give them. They have many to choose from, and they love them. They love them. They put pronouns in front of them and everything. But you have the internal division on the right, and you have the open division that is being spouted from the left, whether it's this recent video that came out from members of the military, former members of the military on the Democratic side in Congress. I know Mark Kelly's one of them, and a bunch of others, saying you can ignore illegal orders or the fight that individual cities, Los Angeles, Memphis, Charlotte, Austin, Dallas, Texas, putting up against federal immigration raids. We said off ramp for something else, but stepping back and observing all this, what are your thoughts on just the state of this union right now, as far as the strife that seems to be everywhere, and everybody is just, it seems like it's dialed up to 11 at all times?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I mean, I don't know how it plays out in the future. There's a couple of different ways it could go. I'm not 100% sold on the idea that the United States is sort of on its last leg. There is a possibility that it could limp on for a very long time in the same state that it is. There's a John Michael Greer had this theory of catabolic collapse, and I think I like to use that model a lot. And essentially, what Greer argued was that an empire will expand until it basically, the resources it takes to fuel the empire exceeds what it's bringing in, right? And then it begins to eat itself, essentially. And he looks at the Roman Empire as an example, and like, it's once it reaches a certain point and it can't sustain, the border regions begin to like, they lose control over the border regions first, right?
Yeah.
But the people at the core of the empire are kind of unaware of what's going on. And you see this in some of the writings, where even after the Roman Empire has pretty much fallen, there are people who no longer live under its purview that still think they do. And so I think there's a possibility that it just dwindles down, and each subsequent generation is living with significantly lower standards of living than the previous one, without really realizing that it's collapsed, if that makes sense, right? So it's just a slow kind of death. That's definitely possible, especially when we see sort of some of the wins that the global American empire has had recently. Now it's also lost a lot too, but it doesn't look like it's fully finished. So I think it could go on a while. If that doesn't happen, I do think that your options are either probably going to be balkanization. Balkanization is the peaceful route.
Yeah.
Right. That's the peaceful route. That is but unfortunately, I don't think that the federal government would allow that. Obviously, they didn't allow it during the Civil War. I mean, that could have been peaceful if they just said, okay, you can leave. That they didn't do that. And power doesn't like to just give up power. So I doubt that's a case. And I think with the more diverse the nation becomes, the more likely things become kinetic. Because once that economy fails and you have all these different competing interest groups, right? And like you mentioned, the left, I wrote an essay recently in which I said one of the things, when you have a coalition of sort of competing interest groups that work together, they have to have a motivation. And you can either have a positive motivation or negative motivation. The left has a negative motivation, right? Yeah. So you can have radical Muslims, LGBT, feminists. You can have all these groups in the camp, as long as you have an enemy that to them is bigger than they are, that they know they have to remove first. So they'll all work together. And for them, that's heritage Christian America. That's the America of like pre-1960, right? Mostly like, I guess, white Christians, right? That's their big enemy.
Let me just drop in real quick. I don't want you to lose your train of thought, but there's the people, there was somebody who I was talking to at the gun range that I work at. And they were talking about, oh, well, the women in New York are going to have to wear hijabs and stuff like that now. And I looked at them and I said, they want to. And he said, what do you mean it's against feminism? And I said, it doesn't matter if it's against feminism, because they think it's actually empowering because it's destroying the patriarchy and it's against Western civilization. So all these feminist groups who will march for slut walks and all these other things will be happy to put on a hijab and all these things if it's meant to as essentially a middle finger to Western civilization.
No, exactly. And that's their motivation, right? That's their negative motivation. Is for them, it's this, whatever we call it, white Christian America, Western civilization, whatever term they want to use for it, that's the big bad guy for them. And as long as that exists, they'll all work together. Now, Lenin understood this, and that's why when Lenin took power in Russia, he immediately purged, because he understood that some of those groups are, I think he called them natural revolutionaries. They were never going to get the power they wanted. So, he understood that you get rid of them. Otherwise, they're going to infight, right? The problem the conservative movement has in America is it can't offer a motivation and you see this now, it's trying to copy sort of the multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multiracial coalition that the left has, but it doesn't have a motivation because it can't. The only things the negative motivation doesn't exist because those on the conservative movement can't agree what their problem with the left is. You have all these different reasons. Some people think it's demonic and want to destroy it. Some think it's just liberalism went a little too far. There's no real agreement there, right? So that doesn't work. As far as a positive motivation, the conservative movement, the only real positive motivators are religion and ethnicity, really, or land, we'd say, right? So you see like the nationalist movements in Europe towards the end of the 1800s, and it's, you got German nationalism, you have Italian nationalism. They can all unite behind a base core culture, right? Like they can be Italians from different regions, but they're Italians, right? They're Germans, whatever, they're Greeks. America doesn't have that anymore. So you don't have sort of a culture or an ethnicity to bind behind. And you don't have a religion, because American Christian, you can say Christianity, but the problem is, like, we all know that, like, you have at least Catholics and Protestants, and Protestants encompasses what of all these different Protestant groups, right? So that's really kind of that term does a lot of heavy lifting, right?
It does.
And then you have this new Orthodox contingent coming in that is grabbing up a bunch of young men, and they can't all agree. So you're not going to motivate people with some vague, flavorless version of Christianity, I don't think.
No.
And so, and so what is the conservative movement going to do in the face of that? Because we see them trying to placate the new, and you see them trying to grab up all the new ethnic blocks in the US, with Indians being a good example, right? They're willing to burn, let's say, political capital to an extent with their voter base, which is, sort of like Heritage America, in order to bring on the Indians, because they know, or at least they're banking on the fact that the average conservative voter is still going to vote for them regardless, because the option is the left, the Democrats. And I don't think I think what this infight between the conservative movement is going to show is that that's not going to work. These people either will not show up to the polls to vote, or they're going to splinter off and create what essentially operates as a third party, which will allow the left to win more elections and seize more power.
So there's a couple things I can draw from that with John Slaughter here on my guest here in the Barrett Breakdown. I can take Catholicism for a second here in the United States. Church attendance is dwindling in our ordinary rite mass, and it's exploding in the Latin mass inside baseball. But the bishops, and who are more indoctrinated with liberation theology, have decided that open borders is a great solution to fill their pews with Hispanics. The problem is the Hispanics come in, first generation maybe does, second generation, as soon as it becomes Americanized, leaves the church. So they have not fixed their problem of, we need to address the problems with the mass. We're just going to try and import our way out of this with more Hispanics that'll go to church and things like that. Conversely, the biggest group of people that came out for Trump, and this is just a fact, were men of all, black men, Hispanic men, white men. Mostly white men, just because that's the majority of them. But men of all races came out to vote for Trump. for the promise of work, the promise of getting back to American values, heritage America, the things you were saying. And then he turns around and he says, "Yeah, by the way, we're gonna bring in these Indians, and we're gonna back Vivek in Ohio, and we're gonna do all these other kinds of things." And so it's once again, it's a betrayal of that America first quote unquote idea that, oh, you're gonna, you gave us the platitudes to get elected, but now you don't trust us, or it's not economically an incentive for you. You're going to bring in somebody else who this is what America is. These immigrants, these people are, and it's just a slap in the face to the people that came out and voted for you when you said, "Hey, I'm going to represent you guys. And that was the appeal of Trump. I'm going to represent you. I'm going to be your fighter and all these things." And now he's coming around and he's saying, "Nah, well, we need these guys here to make computer chips, or make." One lady was saying, "Well, we need the immigrants who are skilled to build ships." And I'm thinking to myself, does somebody in Mumbai know how to build a ship better than somebody here in America? Like, you can't give me these types of examples, because it's all just nonsense. And every time they give those examples, John, their situation becomes worse and worse.
Oh no, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that I'm sure you saw at least clips from that interview on Fox with Laura Ingraham. And I
Mhm.
mean, and she's right. Well, we've done it before, right? And then granted, you could say, well, we had the entirety of America was geared towards ramping up for this war, right? And so everything was mobilized. Yeah, fine, whatever. One, there's nothing to say you can't necessarily do that outside of wartime. Number one, so I don't understand why people lean on that, but
Well, that
I think
almost
the
connects to I don't mean to interrupt. That kind of connects to one of your points you made earlier about the Japanese. It's kind of like the Japanese kind of did
Mhm.
that as well when they ramped up their efforts between governments and business. You're saying again, they could do that again. It's just too many libertarians get very gun shy when you start doing stuff like that.
Well, that's one of the biggest issues the conservative movement has outside of like the social issues is the economic problem and the fact that for so long they've been married to this free market capitalism. And look, I'm all for free markets to an extent, like at least internally,
Hmm.
but there does have to be, again, there has to be a conversation about uh, like profit can't be the only motive. And I
Yeah.
do think this is something, and I've talked with my Protestant friends about this. I think it's something particular, and in the same way that they'll talk about the Protestant work ethic, right? I guess if we grant them that, we have to say, well, one of the downsides to that is profit becomes the ultimate good in a sense, right? That's a negative side to that. It's a particular problem that they have that nobody wants to address. And you even see this like with the H-1B or any of the immigration. Part of that is economically driven, not just from the standpoint of the businesses, but because you got to pay these pensions, you got to pay Social Security. You don't have the population. And you made the point earlier about Hispanics coming in, and yeah, the first generation stays going to church and all that, but they that next generation becomes thoroughly Americanized, we'll say, right?
Mhm.
This is something that there's a really good book called Fate of Empires that this guy named John Hubbard wrote about the Roman Empire. And it's only like 150 pages long. It's really short. But one of the points he makes is that towards the end of the empire, he says multitudes flooded into Rome only to disappear like water into the sands, right? That
Hmm.
they would flood into Rome. Rome was doing the same thing. They're bringing these people in, and those people would stop having children, and they would not have big families. It only took one generation. So it's the same exact problem. You're bringing people in for these economic reasons, but it doesn't work because the minute they get here, they become Americanized in the worst possible way. So I don't. The economic thing is a huge problem we're going to have to tackle, and it's one of the hardest ones because anything that is restrictive, we'll say, of the free market or of what we'll loosely use the term capitalism is seen as socialist, right? Oh, you want to implement, let's say you want to make sure that government contracts go to American companies, right? Well, that's, oh, you must be a socialist. You're trying to inhibit the free market. One of the things the Chinese do that, and I don't know that it couldn't be tweaked or work better. So bear with me on this, but
Yeah.
there's a Chinese Communist Party representative on the board of every company. The purpose of that person is to make sure that whatever that company is doing is the best interest of China. Now, that's
Now,
not necessarily a bad thing,
now the
right?
Chinese are allowed to do that. The Japanese are
Right.
allowed to do that. We can't. Not just because of, oh, you're a socialist, but you also have the left that'll say, well, that's an ism. That's a,
Yeah.
that's, you know who else did that, John? The Nazis did it. And you don't want to be like the Nazis. And at this point, if I get called a Nazi, it's like, okay, good. It's 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. I haven't been called that yet, so
Right.
that's fine. But that's the way they kind of scare that back to, oh, well, you don't want, the last time the government helped with that, it was during the Nazi Third Reich. It's like, okay, we get it. But not to interrupt you, but China can do that. Japan can do that. All these countries can do that. And that's why they can have beneficial to their economies because they're allowed to. And yet we can't, because libertarians will scream, and then left. It's almost impossible to try and make anything work in the direction for American people.
Well, and I think, again, back to sort of the point about like why are we seeing this tension? You're absolutely right. Anytime you look at those economic models, because I'm the type of person where not a big fan of necessarily the Third Reich, and not a big fan of Mussolini's Italy or anything like that. But I'm also adult enough to look at the economics and go, okay, well, some of that stuff worked, right? Some third positionist economics is not necessarily bad, and it's just an economic policy.
Yeah.
There's no reason that you can't take it at, like the Japanese did, right, or the Chinese, and utilize it to your own advantage. And I think, like you said, they've been using all these pejoratives. Oh, you're a Nazi, you're this, that, or the other. Well, that worked for a while. It's not working anymore. So when the younger generation gets called that, or they read about whatever it is, economic policies will say, and they go, well, that's not a bad idea. And somebody on the conservative side or on the left throws out a pejorative and calls them a Nazi or calls them a fascist or whatever, they don't care.
No.
And because they don't care, they're still going to try to bring those issues to the table. And that's creating tension, because I do think one of the other problems is the conservative movement has not had to deal with the problems of its ideology for at least since World War II. And now that they're having to actually have conversations with people on the actual right, it's causing a lot of tension.
Yeah, because post World War II, it was the military industrial complex that was really the driving force to beating communism, which people don't get mad at me when it's like, oh, yeah, you quote unquote won the Cold War, but you lost everything else because it's here. But this idea that, and for a while, up until Trump, the conservative movement was rooted in Reagan, right? Kind of like how the Democratic Party is kind of rooted in the politics of Obama, and Obama's kind of like their saving grace for everything. Reagan was that. A better example, Kennedy was that before for the Democrats, before Obama. Everything was like, oh, we need to get back to the Kennedy era, and all. They were always trying to mimic that. Republicans and conservatives for a long time were trying to mimic the Reagan years and so forth, because they would always say, hey, we beat the Soviets and we cut taxes, and that was kind of enough for us to go, okay, well, I guess I'll vote for you because that's what we did. And yes, that was fine. But also with Reagan, you had no fault divorce, you had amnesty in California, you had really gun control in a way up in California under Reagan. And so there was a lot of things that were negative that were kind of pushed aside. There were also kind of like Reagan era policies. And then you still have people like Dinesh D'Souza and others that are trying to almost take credit for modern day conservative wins. He did that famous thing. What did the conservatives? And then people are like, no, you didn't do that. You didn't do that. You didn't do that. And it's like, no. But that's really it too, is that we're rooted in this, we're always brought back to the past. And so it's kind of like the Reagan, even you could say Dare Bush conservative idea versus whatever you want to call Trump. Is it America first? Is it MAGA? Is it just trying to rip away from control from the old guard, that ripple between the two, and you have, Dinesh and others on mainstream platforms, and I would even dare say like the Daily Wire and the Blaze are kind of Fox News with millennial dressings on them, just to kind of push the same talking points, versus independent media, whoever it is. You could say Fuentes, Tim Cass, who, like, there's a bunch of them who are speaking to younger generations of people, and they don't exhibit the same talking points. So it's really that messaging thing that you've been kind of really laying on correctly, that is kind of the whole center, I guess, of this information war between the two groups going back and forth.
Well, yeah, I think it's really people. I mean, people are aware of this, but they often don't think about it enough. Which is that up until the internet, right? The government had full control over narrative control. We'll say, right, because the boomers are the first generation to get television, right? And I always kind of look at it like they didn't have the cognitive immune system for that level of propaganda. Nobody did, and they're the first ones to just get hammered by it, right? And then, of course, everybody knows the internet comes in, and that really breaks up this ability to control the narrative, right? All of a sudden, outside information is able to come in. And in an American context, the last time there was real right-wing ideas in America was the America First movement of Charles Lindbergh, right?
Yeah.
This gets killed by the FDR administration, right? It is very, it has a lot of success early on, and it is as Pearl Harbor kills it, because these guys, Lindbergh himself, tried to enlist in the military after Pearl Harbor because they realized, like, okay, well, we're going to war now. There's no avoiding it. And the America First policy of that time was not even, they tried to smear them as isolationists, but they were non-interventionist, and they wanted a Monroe Doctrine on steroids. They wanted to have the United States, Canada, and to a lesser degree South America under the control of the U.S. That's our sphere of influence. Build up our military and say, look, if whether it's the Russians or the Germans or whoever, they're not coming over here. This is ours, but we don't have to go over there and fight. Pearl Harbor killed that. FDR went after Father Charles Coughlin, took everything from him, right? That whole movement was killed. And from that point on, you don't have right-wing ideas in America. You have, like you said, you have this military industrial complex, sort of, we have to beat communists. And then you have Bill Buckley and sort of National Review come in and play defense and make sure that nobody makes it through that doesn't adhere to their specific brand of conservatism. And I think that gave the conservative movement a lot of leeway to kind of do whatever they wanted. And I think they also, if you look at all the victories they had in between that time, so we say after World War II until Trump, all of their victories really come from ripping from the Wallace coalition, right? George Wallace basically goes to the working class, mostly white working class, and says, you're having all these problems. Your kids are having to deal with busing in schools. I'm going to address that. The guy probably nearly would have been president when he not assassinated. He wasn't shot, right? He survived. But Nixon basically rips the Wallace platform, does a similar thing, but drops some of the racial talk. And he's one of the most popular presidents to ever be elected. Reagan just rips off of Nixon, and Trump rips off of the same thing, right? He's addressing the people. But I think the conservatives don't like that. They don't like the fact that in order for them to win, they have to talk to normal people. And I think they want to go to their little cocktail parties in DC and hobnob with, university professors. And they hate the fact that their constituency, the people who vote for them, are just normal guys. Who,
it reminds me. When people like you bring this up, it always brings up in 2012 when Mitt Romney walked around in like blue jeans and a buttoned up shirt. That's the antithesis of it. Like when they try to actually blend in with the normal folk, they stick out like a sore thumb.
Oh no, it's obvious. And that's the thing with that is it's all about authenticity, because there are politicians, especially in the South throughout its history, that were Jeff Sessions was a great example of this. If you see him before he becomes a bigwig in DC, Jeff Sessions never pretended to be a normal guy. He would go to events and stuff, but he was Jeff Sessions from a rich, old Southern money family, and he never tried to hide that, and people are okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
The people voted. The average redneck chud in Alabama voted for Jeff Sessions, even though he was, Colonel Sanders-esque, we'll say, because he was honest, at least as far as they were concerned. So like that whole thing, it's obvious that it's fake. And if they just didn't do that, I mean, that's why when Trump goes and serves McDonald's in a suit, nobody like,
It's
okay, we know what
hysterical.
he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's not pretending to be,
No.
a normal, average everyday guy. But I think that really rubs the conservatives the wrong way. The fact that they want to be something else, but they have to play to this base that they see as stupid and dumb. I got family that works in DC, and they've been there for 20, 30 years. And the way they view the rest of the people in the family who live in Alabama and Texas and stuff like that is you can feel it.
Yeah.
They think, oh, look at these people. It's almost like they want to put on gloves before they come over. Like, oh, God, I gotta. And I think that's what goes on up there. And they hate the fact that at the end of the day, that's your constituency, and that's why they can't really connect with them. But to kind of pivot back to your point now, I lost my train of thought. I forgot what I was going to say.
It's all right.
I was going somewhere with that, but anyways.
Yeah, it is funny how conservatives because before the Democrats were the party of the working man and all these other kinds of things, and that's kind of flipped on a dime in the last 10 years, and the conservatives really don't know what to do with that ball being kind of dropped in their lap. They didn't win the working class through outreach or anything. I mean, Trump did a little bit because Trump, he, whatever you say, not the politician Trump, had a great reputation of hanging out with the dishwashers in the hotels, or I've been to the Trump in Las Vegas a couple times. And one was in 2020, and it was a week before he was going to go there. And we asked the people, hey, Trump's coming here next week. What do y'all think about that? We thought they were going to just be like, oh yeah, he comes here, whatever. And they're like, no, we love it when he comes here because he tips well. And like his party takes care of us. And we actually like, seeing him, and he actually shakes our hand, and we know he doesn't know who we are, but for like 30 seconds, we're like, he actually gives us the time of day. And that was another gift to the Republican Party because the Democrats were too stupid to take Trump as a politician. And so every gift that the right has gotten, every victory you could also say that the right has gotten, has just been a lack of effort or just a whiff on the Democrats' part.
No, you're absolutely right, because I've made this point a lot, that if the Democrats could drop like the transgender stuff and the immigration stuff, they could win back a large percentage of people that vote conservative. They easily. Now they can't do that because, as we said earlier, their coalition depends on those things. They need those things. But if they were able to drop those, they could get it, because the Republicans don't really care.
No,
like you said, they're not actually concerned about the let's say like in Appalachia, they don't really care about these people dying on pills. They could care less about it. They're worried about, again, to the foreign policy stuff. They want to talk more about that. And it's like, if you're from West Virginia or Southern Ohio or Kentucky, and you've watched all your friends, and family members get hooked on pills, and you can't find a job, and you're living in abject poverty, and all you hear about is, wars in the Middle East and what this, we're going to let 600,000 Chinese students in. That's not a winning formula. And the left could gobble those people up as voters if they could just drop the things that repulse them, essentially.
The Democrats actually could have gotten everything they wanted out of Trump in 2016 and in this current term if they just stopped hating him. The one thing about Trump that people have said, and I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before, Trump is a person that likes to be liked, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if the Democrats came in and didn't call him, a representation of Hitler, if they were actually nice to him, he probably would have given them half of what they wanted, because he's a deal maker, and he wanted to look like a deal maker. So it's once again, and this time around too, if he came in and they were they were even a little bit more like, oh, we're past this past, we'd like to move forward, he would give them half of what they wanted. So it's another fumble by them because of their ideological ties, as you said before. But it is hysterical because Trump is probably the most willing to please guy that you could put in the Oval Office right now, and yet they still find a way to fumble that.
Yeah, I mean they can't avoid it. They've like I was saying earlier, Lenin understood that you purge the radicals the minute you get in power. If you don't purge the radicals, you either have to give them sinecures or they're going to revolt, right? But if you continue to give them these little make work jobs or whatever to keep them happy, they're eventually going to accumulate power. And I think that's the position the left is in. They've done that for so long that they're sort of, it's like that old line Jefferson had about slavery. When you have a wolf by the ears, you better not let it go. And it's like that's the position they're in with there probably are moderate Democrats at the top that just want power. And they would love if they could pivot and like we were saying, address these issues that the rest of America, that's voting conservative want addressed, but they can't do it because it'll turn on them. Their own party will turn on them. And I think, it's good for us in that sense, right? They're not, because I don't want them to do that, because that would just give them more power and they would be able to do whatever they want. But yeah, it's an impossible task for them to do. I wish we had somebody in office who, there's some of the people like Stephen Miller and all seem to care, but we just need somebody who actually cares about the average American in a real tangible way.
Yeah. And one of the things that the real American, your average American person is starting to become more and more aware of is that those threats that AI does pose. I'm gonna look at it from a two front perspective. We talked about it very quickly at the beginning about how it's going to radically change pretty much the entire dynamic of society. And then secondly, I want you to address it as somebody who has written a book and the creative toll that AI will take on art. But the first one is the fact that I've been saying this. If you've been watching any of these interviews, if you watch my shows before, you're not learning anything new. The fact is that the government, whoever it is, the corporations, they have the AI built in already that if they dropped it tomorrow could eliminate 80% of jobs out there. We're talking like the data entry jobs, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a conscientious, they are all conscious of holding that back because of the complete upending of society that it will be. And that's why you're hearing things like, hey, we need to redo SNAP. Like we need to redo the SNAP benefits so we can get rid of the waste. I kind of feel, and I heard this, I think I heard it on Timcast or something a couple days ago. Maybe maybe they're prepping that for a UBI type formula because UBI is on the table. Elon Musk has talked about it. People are talking about it. A lot of people got a first run on it during 2020, and a lot of people really enjoyed John being able to sit at home and just do nothing. And then so there's the societal impact of 50, let's just be conservative, 50% of the population losing jobs overnight. Friday night they clock out, Monday morning there's no job. Like that's how quickly it could change. And then there's that catastrophic downflow. Okay, well, people don't have work now. What do? How, you can give them money, but they need purpose. And yeah, AI is something that people talk about, but I don't think they really understand, John, what they're talking about.
No, the historical parallel here, and this is why, and I've got a lot of shit for this over the years, which is encouraging people to read Marx, not from a philosophical standpoint, because you can read Marx and just don't listen to the garbage, the dialectical materialism, all that stuff, like all the philosophical stuff. If you can ignore that and get to sort of the issues he's talking about. Again, when the Industrial Revolution happens, people fail to understand how disruptive that was to the average person. You have people who can live and provide for themselves off the land, or they have a trade. And when we think of trades today, we think of electricians, plumbers, etc. But we're talking candle makers, cobblers. There are a litany of skills and trades that people had, which they could make a living from. You take that and you go from that being the normal mode of life, and within 100 years, you go to where almost all of those jobs have been turned over to factories. And you take those people and you say, hey, you can't farm anymore because you can't compete. We're going to shove you into a city. We're going to put you into a factory. And the conditions in those factories at the time, Marx isn't wrong when he's saying, look, people are getting crushed to death and they're working these insane hours. because again, electricity's invented. Now people can work all night long. It is absolutely disruptive to human life. And communism offered the alternative. It said, look, this isn't fair. This isn't right. The average person who listened to Marx and the workers of the world or whatever, the workers don't care about all the philosophical crap. Right. And Marx even talks about this. He talks about how much he hates the German workers. When he goes to the factories, he hates them because they're just a bunch of dumb chuds, basically. They don't care about all his philosophical stuff. What they care about is
the conservative politicians.
Right, exactly. And so Marx is making these critiques about alienation and things like that. You know, being alienated from the fruits of your labor and basically becoming a cog in a machine. And he's addressing these, and he's not wrong in the problems. People fail to address them properly, and communism is there to fill that gap. AI poses the exact same risk that the Industrial Revolution did in the way it could transform and disrupt our day-to-day lives. Like you said, I mean, if it takes away 50% of jobs, well, what do you do? What do you do then? And you give people UBI, but people need purpose. They need reason. I think it was Trotsky that talked about, because Trotsky was just absolutely retarded. But he basically is like, oh, you know, there's going to be a Mozart or a Bach on every corner now because people are going to be free to do art. That's not how it works, man.
Most people shouldn't be doing that either. That's the problem.
They shouldn't be doing that. And two, they don't have the motivation and the self-discipline to do that. They're going to go with the easiest drugs, pornography, television, whatever can placate them, you know, to give them, you know, to make them feel good in the moment. Right. And so that's not going to work. And so the question is going to become, well, how do you get in front of that? And I've thought about this a lot, and I have no idea, outside of going like the Luddite route and being like, you know, smash all the machines and you know, just, you know, it's like you know, in Dune. Have you read Dune?
No, I have not.
So have you ever heard of the Butlerian Jihad?
In passing. I'm not super. I know the surface level, but not too far into it.
So essentially, it's just the idea that in the Dune universe, they had basically this problem with the computers, and so they rewrote. They came up with like this weird religion. It's like it's a type of Catholicism. It's called, and they have the Bible. It's called the Orange Catholic Bible. They rewrite the 10 Commandments, or they add to them, and one of them is, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the image of man," because the computers became such a problem. They go to war with them. And that's why in the Dune universe, there are no computers. They start like basically breeding people to be good at math and stuff, like to create human ones. But they that was their answer to that. And so I'm like, do we need like a Butlerian Jihad and just like destroy the machines? You know?
Yeah.
But my concern with that is like we've seen that play throughout history. The samurai at was it Shirayama, the last samurais to fight against the Japanese Imperial Army, like there was no winning that. No. Even if they win that battle, that technology's coming. You know, the Luddites smash all the machines. You know, what they were spinning thread or whatever, and I forget the term for it now for some reason. But the looms, they smashed all the looms, the mechanical looms. That didn't do anything. At the end of the day, the factories came. You know.
Well, there's also the problem with that idea is that it's not isolated to just us. It's happening in China and Japan. It's happening in every quote unquote industrialized country. So yeah, you can smash everyone here. Doesn't mean it won't be another one will not be injected from somewhere where you cannot smash.
Yeah, again, like if the samurai somehow, let's alternate history, beat the Japanese Imperial Army and they're able to reconquer Japan as in a new shogunate arises, what, China shows up? Russia shows up, the United States shows up with cannons and guns and planes. I mean, even if they delayed 100 years, so there's planes, like you're not going to win, you know? And so you're kind of trapped in that. And I, for the life of me, have no idea how we get out of that.
Yeah, it is a complicated problem because you have the people like Elon Musk who are like, well, it's just fine. We'll give people UBI and it'll be fine. And it's like, well, that's of course that's a 10,000-foot view because you're not affected of it because you're a trillionaire. Of course, you'll be controlling all the machines as well. But the idea that everything, I actually saw a very dystopian commercial when I was actually watching Amazon Prime. I was watching a show, and the commercial started, the curtains opened up for her. It was an Amazon product. Then a coffee maker was an Amazon product, and then it was the little Roomba that was an Amazon product that was in the house. And then there was this wide shot of the house, and there was one of these humanoid robots doing the laundry. And it was like, look how great your life can be if you can get it all on Amazon with all these things. I'm going, this is the most dystopian thing in the world. Like, what is, and of course, what was she doing, John? She was playing a guitar in the background and writing music. And of course, I was feeding that dream that, you can just go be a pop star if you don't have to do anything else all day. And they really are kind of feeding it in. And at the same time, I'm just thinking about this off the cuff. They've really set the stage with influencer culture, because as a father, I'm not saying yours, but I'm sure you've seen others, and you've seen the statistics, and you've seen this idea that kids don't want to be mathematicians or doctors or lawyers. They all want to be influencers. They all want to be on YouTube. They all want to be on TikTok, which is one step away from, it's your new rock star, right? It's a new version of a rock star. Everybody wanted to be one back then. Now everybody with a phone and a terrible idea can be a quote unquote influencer. And so they don't have motivation to do anything else. And so you have, technology and allowing that. And then at the same time, AI coming behind them and saying, well, you don't have to do all these jobs that nobody wants to do anymore. You don't want to do all these dirty things. You can just go sit in front of your computer for 15 hours and people will love you and laud you and do all these other kinds of things. So it is really this technocracy that just, it feels like the other shoe is going to drop, and nobody knows when it's going to drop and how hard it's going to be and who's going to drop it first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only consolation, if this is one, is that I do think that when it happens, it'll eventually kill itself, essentially. Because I think that the human capital it would need to maintain the system would eventually dwindle, right? Like you would create essentially a system where you just wouldn't have the people to maintain it, right? Like it can maintain itself to a degree, but it can't do power lines.
No.
It can't keep those things, the actual infrastructure it can't maintain. And I think you lose, or you get people that just decide to revolt. One of the things the Apache used to do in the West is they would cut the telegraph lines and they would splice them with horsehair. So you couldn't figure out where the lines were cut. And that was extremely disruptive. And you might get people doing stuff like that, just intentionally sabotaging the systems or whatever. But I do think you're right. It's the shoe's going to drop. It's sort of inevitable to a degree. I don't know how long it would be sustainable, honestly.
That's true. There is everybody kind of thinks of Terminator 2 type AI, but at the same time, we don't know in real time how it'll actually work itself out and what it will do. So it's we just have to kind of sit back and wait and see. But in the meantime, we're seeing AI being, and the funny thing is everybody thought AI was going to go after, your data entry jobs, your menial jobs that people don't like. And the first thing it went after, John, was art. It went after pictures, music, writing. As a writer yourself of the Crimson Veil, which we're transitioning to right now, how do you see AI really damaging and just competing? And I don't think it can really compete, but right now people think it can compete with art now, because I can just go to Gronk and say, draw me a picture of a spaceship that looks like a pirate ship in flying around Mars, and it will do that. And that was 30 seconds instead of somebody actually taking the time to draw the detail and actually put in the human capital behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, I think it can compete at a base level, right? Like as a writer, I've never been, and I don't mean this as derogatory, but there's sort of there's a big difference between like literary fiction and genre fiction, or like what I would call like airport books, right? Like when I was a kid, I liked John Grisham books, but John Grisham books are very formulaic. It's like Southern small town lawyer takes on X corporation, right? Whatever. That's like half of his books, right?
It's like the Jack Reacher series too.
Yeah, like Jack Reacher is a great example, or what was that? Along Came a Spider was the movie, but there was the black detective. Like, what I'm talking about? Morgan Freeman played him.
Yeah, I can't.
Alex
think of
Cross.
Oh yes, Alex Cross. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, but his books, I think James Patterson wrote those, but it can do that. I think that's what people have to come to terms with. It can crank out just what the average person wants, call it slop, whatever. It can do that. It's going to be just like with music. It can make songs that were top 40 hits. It's not hard to do, especially with all the data. What it won't be able to do is put the real raw human element in. And I think what you're going to see, and this is how I've come to look at it, in the same way that you can go buy furniture from a big box store, that's what it's going to do for art. But there's always going to be a market for people who want real handmade furniture, and they will pay a premium for it, because for them, and myself included, the little imperfections in it, those types of things give it meaning, right? And then just knowing that somebody poured their blood, sweat, and tears into building this, whatever it is, a cabinet or a table, there's always going to be a market for that. And I think that's where it's going to head with art, because I've played with it and I've had it critique my stuff and all, and it's not. Its critiques are terrible because it tries to make everything as palatable as possible, is really what it tries to do. And so it's like, oh, well, if I was making something that I was going to throw on the shelf at Walmart, and people were going to pick up to read in the airport, well, yeah, it probably would work, but it's not going to create Moby Dick. It's not going to create Anna Karenina or some of the great novels we think of. So I think that's where it's headed. I think it'll kill it for a lot of like generic artists, but like the great ones will still exist, if that makes sense. But on a caveat to that,
because what is the one piece of music that has survived its vinyl records, despite the fact that cassettes were supposed to make it better, and then CDs were supposed to make it even better, and now we all can literally carry around a gazillion songs in our phones. Yet people pay top money for the vinyl, and it's not just for the imperfections. It's for the cover. It's for all. It's the design. They want that tactile feel. And yeah, of course, the pops and all these other kinds of things that happen on the vinyl. But that's a great example as well. Is that people thought, oh, the vinyl record is dead, and yet it is still very. There is a, I don't want to, it sounds huge niche market, which I don't think you can have, but I'm going to say it, of people that look, we're just going to go with it anyway, who want these things. There are still record stores. There may not be as many as there used to be, but record stores still exist, and they're not cassette stores. They're not CD stores. There are vinyl record stores. And so it's the same thing when you look at like movies. Movies are going to be, movies are formulaic now. AI is going to copy that. I've heard people giving examples of like Disney Plus. You'll go into Disney Plus and there'll be the Disney Creator Corner where you'll just take Disney AI and it'll, with all their content, make whatever you want. Yeah, it's going to be great for most people, but there will be a segment that actually want to go out and see films with soul and films that are, like AI can't really do cinematography like Daniel Villeneuve, who actually directed the Dune movies and directed Sicario, and there's just a way he can see it that AI can't. So you're correct in all that regards, and I completely stomped on you while you're making a point. So finish, please.
Oh no, I just my kids. To your point about the tangible arts, my oldest son, maybe about 2 months ago, I have a record collection because I used to really be into music when I was younger. And he found my I like the White Stripes at one point, and he found it, and he literally picked it up, and he was like, man, it's so cool to actually like own the music. Like he was mind blown by that, right? Because he's never even owned anything, and he thought it was a CD. First of all, he was like, is this CD? And I was like, now I'm not even that old, but that hurts a little bit. But but he was
Let me get off of the ground for a second here, and
he was enamored though with this idea that you could physically own the thing. But there's going to always be a market for people who want something real. I mean, there's still a market for classical music, even in today's world where 90% of people don't listen to it. It's still there. People still appreciate it. Now I will say, when it comes to writing, and this is something I've had to contend with because it's demotivated me a time or two, which is I do think we're headed towards a post-literate society. I think literacy has peaked. It's going to dwindle. And so you have to accept the fact that you are writing for a very small audience. If you're trying, especially if you're trying to write something, that's not formulaic, you're trying to do something really deep and real, and you're trying to, compete with the William Faulkners of the world, we'll say, right? Like you're trying to channel that old novelist sort of spark. You're speaking to a very small group of people, in the future, especially.
Well, we've already seen the fact that literacy has cratered in school now. I mean, most kids can't read when they graduate from high school. The reading levels have already collapsed due to the fact that, they can be, and audiobooks are not bad, podcasts are not bad. Obviously, we're doing
Mhm.
now, but they're the idea of being able to read and actually decipher things through written word is completely gone. And as the fact that you are a writer and that you did put out the Crimson Veil, earlier this year, right, in January.
Yeah, it came out in January. Yeah,
January.
like January 9th, I think.
Would you describe it as a noir? Because I know it's a private, it's the
Mhm.
classic private eye storytelling, but is it more of a noir setting, or what were the inspirations behind the book?
So for me, what I wanted to do, it was kind of even though it's not a very long book, it was kind of uh, I was kind of like reaching beyond what I thought my capabilities were. Because what I wanted to do was I wanted to take noir, because I've always loved noir,
Yeah.
especially film noir, but the dime store novels as well. And I love that atmosphere. And I wanted to take that, but I wanted to give it a real literary feel. I wanted it to use that scaffolding of the traditional private detective. The you've got the woman, you've got all that stuff, right? Your traditional, think of Dick Tracy or
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart films. I wanted to do that, but I wanted to give it like literary legs and give it depth and meaning and have it kind of be something that you could read, and you would stop and feel like it, because sometimes when you read certain novels, there are moments where, especially when you read the great ones, where you have to stop and just kind of take a moment. Man, that
Mhm.
really spoke to me. I mean, people talk about the Grand Inquisitor chapter in the Brothers Karamazov being sort of like that, right? And
Yeah.
so I wanted to do something similar that kind of spoke to people, and I also wanted to give it, the other motivation was I wanted to write a Christian novel that was not explicitly Christian necessarily, but wasn't corny. Because again, like I grew up, I'm a convert, a Catholic convert. I grew up in Southern Baptist home, so I was exposed to every type of corny Christian media. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, everything that came out, I was like, it was a Bible man, or it was, just the corniest stuff you could imagine. And I thought noir, for me at least, because of the redemptive element that's in noir, because all the characters are flawed and they're bad to an extent, right?
Yeah.
Gave me the ability to play with these ideas of redemption, and sacrifice, and give it Christian undertones without being so explicit that I'm like beating someone over the head with that.
Well, that's a great. I mean, that's amazing in the fact that when we look at Christian entertainment and it's Catholic, it's Protestant, whatever, it's awful. I think all of us
Mhm.
can agree that 99.9% of Christian content is terrible, which is why it's never caught on. Well, we need to start a Christian studio. Yeah, good luck with that. Everybody else has tried it. It never works out because we're afraid. We're
Mhm.
afraid to address these characters in these Christian stories as being weak. They always have to. I mean, and if it is weak, it's always like a superficial. Oh, I was mad for 20 seconds, Dad, and then all these other kinds of like things, where it's Catholicism, Christianity is a redemption story. It is, when you look at it, it's all about redemption. The Peter redemption. I mean, you can go down the list, all the great ones. There was redemption moments for all of them, and the fact is, we are so afraid of making our characters a little bit dirty or a little bit scuffed, because we don't want to offend people, which is not the point. The whole point is, yes, everybody has the redemptive arc, and you can use people to do so. And I think I love to hear that, because great stories require flawed characters and they have to go on a journey. And if they can't go on a journey, then you get like your Hallmark special where we saved the Christmas tree store yay, and that's kind of it. And nobody, it's empty. It's junk food media. And I like the fact that you're not afraid to attack, flawed characters and say, hey, flawed characters, guess what? We're all flawed. And you can, find those themes within there. I just, as you can tell, I love that fact
Yeah.
because so many people are so afraid of it, and it's not. You shouldn't be.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that element and the element of dealing with faith as if like if you just pray really hard, everything works out just fine, which I think is extremely detrimental because when that doesn't happen, then you go, well, what am I doing wrong? I guess it doesn't work.
Well,
So yeah, I
I've always
wanted to,
heard of it as treating our Lord and Savior like a genie, right? If
yeah,
I pray
exactly.
really hard, you'll get my wish this time.
Yeah, and then what happens when that doesn't work, right? It breaks people,
Yep.
I always looked at it like, well, if all the apostles suffered, that's probably an unavoidable thing. You're not going to avoid it by praying hard, right? I mean, they knew Jesus personally; they still suffered, so good luck. But yeah, I wanted to play with those ideas because I had grown up in that, and I said, there's not a lot of Christian media that deals with reality, that just deals with the world as it is, and says, look, these characters are flawed. There is redemption, but redemption, one of the themes I play with in the book is sort of this idea that like in order to truly be redeemed, it sort of requires sacrifice.
Yeah.
You can't just so the main character in the novel has to kind of come to terms with the idea that like if you really want to do the right thing in the end in this particular situation in the novel, you're gonna have to risk your own life. That's just it. And there's no way out of it. If you take the safe route, you're going to be fine. You're going to leave and you're going to get whatever you want, but you're not going to fix the situation, right? And so if you want to, so sacrifice to an extent requires blood to an extent, right? And that's sort of what I was playing with that. And I feel like noir gave me the best avenue for that because of the fact that all noir deals with everybody being flawed. The hero in every noir is always not really a good guy. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's particularly why I went that route with it. And also I love the genre. So
It is an underserved genre. I will absolutely give you that. And every time, like in the last 20 years, when they've come out with noir styled stuff, you can tell it's really just they like the dim lights, they like the graininess of it, but they don't actually want to delve into it because I just don't think a lot of them have the ability to do so. Because the flawed character has to go on a hero, some kind of redemption arc. And I think modern Hollywood has no desire or want to have redemptive stories. Everybody's an anti-hero no matter what. The whole through line is an anti-hero regardless. And that's, yeah, the anti-hero idea, the replacement of the hero and the introduction of the anti-hero as the permanent fixture in all stories has been very detrimental to storytelling. Anti-heroes are great once in a while. It's kind of like pizza. I love it, but I can't have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or my arteries are going to blow up. The same thing with the anti-hero. If everybody's an anti-hero, John, nobody is. And so
right.
you have to have heroes again, and you have to have people that fight through things. And I think that's a really it's and I'm going to introduce the word. I think that idea of the masculinity of the man being able to push through and being able to accept flaws and work on the flaws to make themselves better. Younger generations don't have any of that because they have the anti-hero. I'm flawed and I'll always be flawed and it'll always be this way and all this other kind of stuff. And once again, great every once in a while, but not the heroes that other generations grew up with, or even just the stories that other generations grew up with. And that's why, storytelling and the fact that AI will take that over is so important because that's how we pass down traditions and values and all these other things. Our Lord and Savior spoke in parable for a reason, because that was the best way to get story. That's the best way to get those things across. And we're losing that with AI, and we're losing that with the general lack of, let's just be real, talented individuals to write.
Well, and I think to your point, it's particularly pervasive on the right because conservative-minded parents have turned their kids away from the arts for so long, right? And so they're, even when I was growing up, in the environment I did, I've always enjoyed reading. And I, you know, I had to deal with the fact that like it was considered like almost gay. Like, oh, you like to read? What are you, a homo? You know? And I'm like, no, I like, it's a good book, man. Like, I don't, you know, or you know, and so that was sort of the way it was sort of framed. And of course, the left obviously captured the arts and gate kept as well. But conservative parents never helped by never encouraging the arts. And I, one of the reasons I always encourage people who, because a lot of times I'll have people say, well, fiction's not important. And the example I always use is Braveheart. And I'm like, if you ask the average person who William Wallace is, they don't think of the historical character. They think of Mel Gibson.
Mhm.
Because as you pointed out, parables, stories, that's how things are communicated. That means more to people. If you want to reach people, you have to be able to tell stories in that way. And the conservatives in America for a long time have kind of poo-pooed that idea and said, "Oh, well, you know, you need to do a real job." You know, and I'm not saying like, "Hey, go drop everything you're doing because you're 17, you're going to be a writer," but you can be a writer in your spare time.
Yeah.
You know, you can still do your job or go get a trade or whatever and write. It's not, you know, it's not a zero sum game in that sense, but it's definitely, like you said, it's very powerful because that's how people, you know, we all had to sit in school and watch, you know, whatever, Anne Frank or whatever, like that's Schindler's List or, you know, whatever it is, Braveheart. You have to sit and watch that stuff, and like that's the story that you remember.
Mhm.
You know, those kids don't leave class and remember the actual story. They remember the movie, and that's how they see. You know, how many people think World War II was Saving Private Ryan? Like
Yeah.
that's World War II. And if
Yeah.
you ask them their knowledge on it, it's based on the movies they watched. And so it's definitely something that would behoove people on the right who have a artistic leaning to go with that.
I've always and one thing I will say, I can't speak out of both sides of my mouth, but I'm about to, that you know, AI could be terrible, but it also, if a couple of really talented artistic people on the right could get in and actually use it, they could compete one on one with a dying Hollywood, because Hollywood is collapsing in real time as we see it. Their products are becoming worse and worse, and people are still starved for these films, and they're still starved for this type of entertainment. If we are going to have to embrace, if AI is going to be here, I always said, if you're a talented enough person on the right, if you get into it, you can define and you can actually set yourself up really well to dominate that space. And it kind of speaks to your point. I don't want to envelop your point in there, but I think people, in a way, they should embrace it, because the film industry for the next 25 years will be AI driven. And so it depends on whether you just want to sit back and cross your arms and say, well, I'm just not going to do anything. Or you could say, all right, well, let me see what I can do, and let me see what kind of stories I can bring to the table. And I think, at least from the film perspectives, yes, films will be made by humans and things like that, smaller scale, as you said before. But there is a chance for people on the right, because AI could level the playing field, but it won't be for long. But it could level it long enough for people on the right to make impacts.
Yeah, I mean, it'll do kind of what the Amazon self-publishing industry did. It's like, yeah, it tore down the barrier to entry for a lot of writers who couldn't get their stuff published because they had all these quotes, especially like around the mid 2000s. It was just like if you were a white male writer, like kick rocks, right?
Yeah.
But the Kindle Direct, or just the publishing print on demand, that service allowed for people, myself included, to do that and to be able to write their book. You know, I did everything. I did the cover myself. I formatted it, all of it myself. Was able to publish it that way. The only difference is you kind of have to sift through a river of slop to find good stuff, because
Mhm.
everybody can do it. But like you said, it's going to give opportunities for people. The challenge will be, how do you get eyes on
Yeah.
your material? That'll be the challenge. But that in that sense, yeah, it'll probably function in a similar way that print on demand did for novels.
Yeah. I actually, I probably, it's not a very long book. It's just a defense for Catholics and firearms. And it's the same thing. Like, you can buy it's on all these outlets. but you're responsible for all the advertisement. If you don't talk about it, it nobody knows it exists. So if you're willing to do the work around it, yeah, you can absolutely do it. But it's very interesting in that regard. And so let's see. I think we pretty much covered everything in regards to all these other kinds of things. I do want to kind of ask you some one-off questions. There's really nothing you can't really flow together on this part. Being a firearm guy, being a military guy yourself, somebody who's actually gone out and done some things. You put a tweet out the other day that I absolutely agreed with. And it's two parts. One, it's the fact that a lot of people get into firearms as kind of a cope, or not a cope, but as a crutch, figuring that especially men, they will get into firearms and then they will neglect things like, taking some kind of martial arts or just even staying in shape. And I find that interesting as society seems to be more fractured, and as the social services that we're used to are completely gone. Right, police being defunded, being scaled back, you being more on your own. The fact is that here in America, especially on the conservative side, there is the idea that they kind of sit around and they kind of clutch their guns and they just feel very safe with them. When they believe me, I work at a gun range, and the amount of times I see people on the range that probably shouldn't. I'm not saying they should, folks. It's their right, but they should do a lot more training with them. Is quite noticeable, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of expand on that point.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's really, I think that it's good to be proficient with firearms, and they're a tool, and they need to be viewed as a tool, but they're not the only tool. And I think it lulls people into a false sense of security. It's like, well, I have this gun, so I can protect myself, and it's like, well, there's a lot of scenarios where that doesn't work out. And also, anybody who's been in the military, especially if you've been like in the infantry on like a line company, one of the big things is that, for example, cardio is a huge thing. If you can't ruck march very far, I don't care how good you are with a gun, you're useless to a point, right? You just become a liability. So if you're planning for, Mad Max style, whatever, it's like, okay, well, if you can't run a mile, you're probably screwed. You can't hold up in your house. Anybody who thinks they're going to be able to do that just needs to study the Rhodesian Bush War and see how that worked out. That it doesn't work. You're isolated farm when 500 people show up. You run out of bullets, but also it prevents people from taking the accountability to be in shape, to train. I wrestled, my sons wrestle, and I train with them. They on the weekends and the off seasons, we wrestle together, and it helps, me stay in shape. But I think all men need that ability. You need to be the ability to protect yourself, but also your family in a situation where you don't have a firearm, and you have to be on. I think men need to be honest with themselves. Like, well, if someone broke in my house and I didn't have access to my gun, couldn't get to it for whatever reason, what am I going to do? And I think that, again, it needs to be a tool, and the other tools you have are your physical fitness. I'm not saying everybody needs to be running an Ironman or be able to bench 3 plates, but you should be proficient in defending yourself.
So I guess I'll follow that up. Being a father, I know all my buddies are fathers, and they all have kids, and most of them, without a doubt, at some point have their children in some kind of jujitsu. In your case, yours are wrestling. How important nowadays, and just overall, do you feel like, especially for boys? Obviously, if you have daughters, it would be good to have them have that kind of discipline and so forth. But how important is it for boys to kind of know how to fight, or even be in fights, wrestling, controlled fights and things like that, to understand the physicality of those types of things, instead of, we had generations of kids kind of just sitting, looking at tablets, playing video games, and doing all the kind of becoming very soft. And we've become very soft, especially in the male aspect, not being able to defend themselves in these cases. How important do you think it is for young boys, especially, to have some kind of discipline when they're growing. Because when I was growing up, it was kind of like a cool, oh yeah, this kid knows karate and all this other kind of stuff. It wasn't something that was kind of a must have. I feel nowadays it's a must have if you have boys, that they have to know how to do this.
Well, I think first of all for boys, the one of the most important things it gives you is actually it's ironic that the more experience you have in whatever combat sport you want to pick, in general, the more humble people are, because you learn very quickly that there's always somebody out there who can kick your ass essentially. You know what that feels like, so it takes away some of that false confidence and bravado. It also takes away the need to sort of peacock as well, because you have that confidence, you know how to do that. I'm going to be biased here because I love wrestling. I think it's the best sport for young boys, at least at some point, because the discipline that it provides, because people don't, other sports do provide discipline, but with wrestling, you have to maintain your weight. Excuse me. You have to maintain your weight. The training regimen is insane, because a lot of times people don't understand how physically taxing grappling is. 3 minutes wrestling is insanely exhausting, and being tired turns everybody into a coward, right? Like you reach a point where people will just quit and they'll let you just beat up on them. You get all that from wrestling, but you also learn to really push through adversity. You watch wrestling matches and you'll see guys get it handed to them for the first 2 minutes, and they'll hang on enough and they'll end up pinning the guy before the match is over because the other guy gets tired. And I think it provides, and other martial arts do to an extent, but wrestling, the intensity of the wrestling circuit gives it a certain something. It gives it an X factor the other combat sports don't have, right? And also, you're not risking your kids' brain damage, right? Like boxing and getting hit in the face. But I think it's extremely important for all of those reasons. And it even if it's just for like a season or two, it's something that I think gives boys confidence. It humbles them a bit, and it teaches them a certain level of discipline that team sports don't.
So I actually did wrestle in high school for a year, and the reason why I was 160 pounds, and when I went to the wrestling coach, he's like, "Yeah, our 160s all state. So if you want to wrestle, you're gonna have to wrestle heavyweight." And I was like, "Okay." So I won one match out of that whole year, but you just talk about wrestling now. I'm getting flashbacks to doing spins, and I think I need to take a nap, because just even thinking about it now just hurts me. But yeah, it is incredibly effective for boys, especially because we're physical and we need the outlet. We need the outlet for this. And so I completely agree. And I've seen you talk about wrestling and so forth, and the fact that a lot of guys talk a lot of stuff because they've never been hit in the mouth. And the fact is that men do better when they've, I'm not even trying to talk big, but I played amateur rugby for 2 years in college, and that one has a permanent mark because I don't have an ACL anymore on my left knee. But just being able to do those kinds of things really does open up a different side for most boys to actually understand their limits as well, what they can and cannot do. So I think it's really good. And I could honestly, John, I could have you probably here for another 2.5, 3 hours and talk about all kinds of things, but I think I don't want to take up any more of your time. So if you want, let them know where, if they can find it. We're going to have the Crimson Veil. I'm not trying to hawk bad lasers. The Crimson Veil book up, and we'll make sure people know where they can find that. But if they want to follow you, where could they?
Yeah, you can follow me on X. I'm at J Slaughter Esquire on X.com. I also have Substack, which is TexasJohnSlaughter@Substack.com. That's where I write all my sort of political essays and things like that. So if anyone's interested, you can find me there. And then, of course, follow the links. And if they can't follow the links, the book's on Amazon if you just type in Crimson Veil. And then there's other Crimson Veils that are like weird, like creepy, I don't know, fantasy kind of adult, I don't know.
Don't
Smut,
do
we'll call it. Don't type in it's Crimson Veil and then John, and it'll come up. Otherwise, you'll get some weird
No
I'm
worries,
not
folks.
writing smut, I promise.
It'll be in the description down there. So we'll
Yeah.
keep you from going to the smut zones. We'll keep
Yeah,
you
there
free
you
from
go.
that. All right, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out with us here on the Barrett Breakdown. Big thank you once again to John for hanging out with us. We will talk to you all next week. And God bless and Viva Cristo Rey.